I still remember the night. Everything started to unravel, even though at the time I had no idea that's what was happening. It was February 14th, 2017. Valentine's Day. Which feels almost cliché to say out loud. But sometimes the most cliché dates stick in your memory, because they're too cruelly ironic to ever forget. I was standing in the kitchen of our little 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio, a glass of red wine in my hand, waiting for her to come home. The walls were this ugly beige color the landlord insisted on keeping, and the oven timer ticked away like a metronome in the background. I had gone all out that night. Steak, asparagus, mashed potatoes, the kind of dinner we used to have on anniversaries when money was tighter than love ever felt. I had been with Emily since the fall of. I was 22 then, fresh out of Ohio State, working my first real job at an IT help desk. She was 20, studying nursing at Columbus State. We met at a mutual friend's party, though party was a generous word. It was really just a few people crammed into a drafty rental house, drinking cheap beer and blasting Kings of Leon through tinny speakers. She wore this oversized gray hoodie, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, and she laughed at one of my dumb jokes about college town bingo, where you mark your card if you see a guy in cargo shorts or someone puking in the bushes. That laugh stuck with me. I wasn't the type to believe in love at first sight, but with Emily it felt like maybe all the corny songs on the radio had a point. We fell hard fast. By Christmas of that year she was practically living with me in the dingy apartment off High Street, her nursing textbooks stacked next to my old Xbox. It was the kind of love that felt inevitable, like we'd stumbled onto something everyone else was chasing but we'd just happened to get right on the first try. The years that followed weren't perfect. We had arguments like anyone else. Money was always tight. I remember in 2013 when my car broke down and we had to share hers for months, juggling shifts like some poorly organized taxi service. But those struggles had a way of making us feel like a team, like it was us against the world. When Emily graduated in 2015 and got her first job as a pediatric nurse, I felt like we were finally hitting that sweet spot in life where hard work pays off. I was climbing the ladder at my company, even got promoted to systems analyst. We started talking seriously about marriage, about kids, about buying a house. She'd leave Zillow tabs open on my laptop like hints, and we'd spend Sunday mornings drinking coffee, scrolling through listings we couldn't quite afford yet. That's what made February 14th, 2017, so important in my memory. It was supposed to be another one of those milestone nights where everything felt like it was moving forward. I even bought a small jewelry box, though it didn't have a ring in it yet. I wasn't ready to propose, but I wanted to show her I was thinking about forever. Instead, what I got that night was the first shadow of something I couldn't quite name. She came home late, later than she'd. Her hair smelled faintly of men's cologne, but I brushed it off, telling myself it must have been from one of her patients' dads or something like that. She looked tired, distracted, like her mind was someplace else entirely. I remember asking her how her shift was, and she gave me this flat, almost rehearsed fine. Then she hugged me, but it was the kind of hug where her arms barely pressed against my back. Not the kind of hug you give someone you're still crazy about. I noticed it, but I told myself not to overthink. People have bad days. Still, that night, as we ate the steak that had gone cold waiting for her, I kept glancing at her across the table, wondering if I was imagining the thing about hindsight is that it sharpens the edges of memories you once blurred to protect yourself. Now, when I look back at that dinner, I see all the cracks forming. The way she didn't ask about my day, the way she laughed a little too hard at something on her phone instead of at my dumb jokes, the way she said she was so tired, but stayed up scrolling long after I fell asleep. Back then though, I chalked it up to stress. She was working 12-hour shifts at the hospital, and I knew how draining it could be. I told myself she still loved me, that we were solid. After all, she used to call me her forever, like it was a promise written in. In 2018, we moved into a townhouse in Dublin just north of Columbus. It wasn't much: beige carpeting, laminate countertops, but it was ours. I remember carrying the couch up the narrow staircase with my buddy Ryan, both of us sweating and cursing, while Emily directed us like a general. She was always better at organizing than me. We painted the spare bedroom a pale blue, telling ourselves it would one day be a nursery. That room stayed empty, but we didn't let ourselves linger on the thought. Life rolled on, steady and predictable. Vacations to Myrtle Beach, Sunday trips to Kroger, Netflix binges of Stranger Things when it first came out. Normal things, comforting things. But even during those years, small red flags kept popping up. Emily started working more night shifts, often volunteering for them, which I thought was odd since she used to hate nights. She began hanging out with coworkers I'd never met, going for drinks after work that stretched later and later. Sometimes she'd come home smelling faintly of whiskey, her eyes glassy, her laughter forced. I remember one night in 2019, sitting on the porch with Ryan, sipping Bud Light while we grilled burgers. He asked me carefully if everything was okay with Emily. He'd noticed she wasn't around much anymore, that she seemed distracted when she was. I brushed him off, said she was just tired from work. But the truth is I'd already been having the same uneasy thoughts. I didn't want to voice them though, because saying them out loud made them too real. By 2020, when the pandemic hit, our relationship felt like it was running on fumes, though I kept pretending otherwise. Suddenly we were both home more than ever. Me working remotely, her pulling endless shifts at the hospital, exhausted and emotionally drained. Instead of bringing us closer, the stress seemed to drive a wedge deeper. I'd try to plan little date nights at home, order pizza, light some candles, but she'd sit there half engaged, scrolling her phone, giving me one-word answer. Sometimes she'd disappear into the bedroom to take calls from work, and when I'd walk by, I'd hear her laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with me in months. I told myself it was just burnout. Everyone was struggling. I convinced myself that once the world calmed down, so would. But somewhere in the pit of my stomach, I knew. I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, like the faint tremors before an earthquake. I didn't want to admit it, but Emily wasn't my Emily anymore. She was slipping away, piece by piece, and I had no idea how to stop. That's the thing about promises. When someone looks you in the eye and says forever, you want to believe them. You cling to those words, wrap them around your heart like armor. But sometimes promises are just words, fragile as glass, waiting for the right amount of pressure to shatter. And though I didn't know it yet, mine was about to break in a way that would change everything. The moment it all came crashing down wasn't some big dramatic scene straight out of a movie. There was no public confrontation, no shouting in the rain, no melodramatic music swelling in the background. It was quieter than that, almost mundane in how it unfolded. But sometimes the quietest moments cut the deepest, because they sneak up on you when you least expect. It was a Wednesday evening in late October of The leaves in Dublin had turned that brilliant mix of red and gold, the kind of autumn that makes Ohio feel almost picturesque, even with the gray skies hanging low. I had just wrapped up another exhausting day of remote work, my eyes blurry from staring at spreadsheets, and I decided to cook dinner pasta with homemade marinara. The kind Emily used to say reminded her of our trip to Chicago, years earlier when we found that tiny Italian restaurant tucked away near Wrigleyville. She was supposed to be home around 7, but when the clock hit 9 and there was still no sign of her, I started to feel that now familiar knot in my stomach. I called her phone. No answer. Texted her. Nothing. Finally, around 9:30 she walked in. Her hair was a little messy, her cheeks flushed in a way that didn't look like exhaust. She smelled faintly of alcohol again. Whiskey maybe, mixed with the crisp night air. I asked her where she'd been, trying to keep my voice casual, but my chest felt tight. She said she had gone out for drinks with coworkers. Her tone was flat, dismissive, like it was no big deal. But I noticed the way she avoided eye contact, the way she tossed her purse onto the couch, like she wanted the conversation to be over before it even started. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while she scrolled on her phone beside me, her face lit up by the blue glow. I felt something crack inside me, a mix of suspicion, dread and this desperate need to know the truth. Even though I was terrified of what I might find, I reached a point where I couldn't keep ignoring the red flags anymore. The breaking point came 2 days later on a Friday. I was working from home, sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She had left it there while she showered. Normally I wouldn't have touched it. I prided myself on trust, on respecting boundaries. But in that moment, something inside me overpowered all my morals. My hand moved before my brain could stop it. I picked up her phone and saw a notification pop up. A text from someone named Mark H. The message was short. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. I froze, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. My hands went cold, my throat dry. I felt like the floor had just given out beneath me, like I was tumbling into some bottomless pit. I opened the thread, my fingers trembling. And there it was. Weeks of messages. Flirty and intimate. Talking about nights together. Inside jokes I didn't understand. Emojis that cut deeper than any words could. She had called him baby. She had told him she missed him. She had promised to see him again. I remember standing there in the kitchen. Phone in my hand. The smell of coffee still lingering from that morning. And realizing that everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. She promised me forever. She looked me in the eye for years. And told me I was her person. Her safe place. Her future. And here she was. Giving those same words. Those sacred fragile words to someone else. When she came out of the shower wrapped in a towel. Humming to herself like nothing was wrong. I couldn't even speak. My throat was tight. My chest heavy. I just set her phone back down on the counter and walked out. The cold autumn air hit me like a slap. But it wasn't enough to clear my head. I walked for hours that night. Through the quiet suburban streets. The smell of burning leaves in the air. Porch lights glowing against the early darkness. Every step felt heavier. Every thought sharp. How long had this been going on? Who was Mark? Was he a coworker? Did everyone else know except me? I replayed our entire relationship in my head. Searching for moments I might have missed. Times she had lied. Excuses that suddenly made sense. By the time I came back home, my body was exhausted. But my mind was racing. She was asleep already. Curled up on her side of the bed like nothing had happened. I lay there in the dark staring at her. And felt this strange mix of love and hate. Longing and betrayal. I wanted to shake her awake and demand answers. But I couldn't. Not yet. The next morning, I confronted her. Not with anger at first. Just with the weight of my discovery. I told her I had seen the texts. That I knew about. Her face went pale. And for a split second, I saw guilt flash across her eyes. Before she replaced it with cold defensiveness, she said I had no right to go through her phone. She said I was paranoid. Controlling. She tried to spin it back on me. But the evidence was right there. Finally she broke down and admitted it. She said it just happened. That she hadn't meant for it to go this far. She said she was confused. That she still loved me but felt something different with him. Her words felt like shards of glass. Cutting into every memory we'd built together. That weekend was hell. We argued. We cried. We sat in silence for hours. I kept asking myself how someone who had promised me forever could throw it all away for some guy she barely knew. She told me his name was Mark Harrison. A physician's assistant at her hospital. He was a few years older, divorced, charming in the way people are when they have nothing left to lose. The betrayal consumed me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every moment of our relationship, tainted now by the knowledge of her lie. The steak dinners, the beach trips, the Sunday mornings scrolling Zillow. All of it felt like a joke, like I had been the punchline in a story everyone else knew except me. What made it worse was how casual she seemed about it. She didn't beg for forgiveness the way I thought she would. She didn't fall to her knees, pleading to make things right. Instead she talked about needing space, about figuring out what she really wanted. Space. After 10 years together, after promises of forever, she wanted I spent that week in a fog, dragging myself through work meetings, pretending everything was fine, but inside, I was shattered. I'd sit in Zoom calls, nodding along, while my mind screamed, she's with him right now. She's choosing him over you. One night, I drove past the hospital parking lot around 11 p.m., telling myself I just needed closure. I saw her car parked there, but I knew she wasn't inside working. I sat in my own car for an hour, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to storm inside and catch her in the act. But I didn't. Instead I drove home, tears streaming down my face, feeling like the loneliest person in the world. By November the truth was undeniable. She wasn't mine anymore. She still came home to our townhouse, still slept in our bed, but her heart was elsewhere. She looked at her phone constantly, smiling at messages that weren't from. She wore new perfume, dressed differently, carried herself like she was living a double life, and I was just the ghost, haunting the background of her story. The breaking point came fully on Thanksgiving Day. We had planned to have dinner with my parents in Cleveland. I had been dreading it, knowing I'd have to put on a happy face. But when I woke up that morning, she told me she wasn't coming. She said she was too tired, that she had to work the next day. I knew it was a lie. I drove up to Cleveland alone, a bottle of wine riding shotgun, and sat at my parents' table, trying to pretend everything was fine. My mom kept asking where Emily was, and I kept repeating the lie. My throat. I watched my younger cousins laugh and joke. My dad carve the turkey, my mom pass around pumpkin pie, and I felt like I was in some parallel universe. Everyone else's lives were moving forward, full of love and laughter, while mine was quietly disintegrating behind closed. That night, when I drove back to Dublin, the streets were empty, the air bitter cold. I pulled into our driveway, and saw the faint glow of the TV through the living room curtains. For a moment, I let myself hope she was inside waiting for me, maybe ready to apologize, to fight for us. But when I walked in, the couch was empty, the TV was on, but she wasn't there. Her car was gone. And that was the moment, the exact second, I knew it was over. She had promised me forever, but she had chosen him instead. I stood there in the silence of our townhouse, the smell of leftover turkey still clinging to my clothes, and felt the weight of it crush me. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I thought would be my wife, the mother of my children, had thrown it all away, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. After Thanksgiving 2020, life as I knew it began to unravel at a speed I couldn't control. It was like someone had yanked the rug out from under me, and I was stumbling in slow motion, trying to find my balance, while the world tilted sideways. Emily didn't officially leave right away. That almost made it worse. She kept one foot in the door of our townhouse, like she couldn't fully let go of me, but wouldn't give up on him either. Some nights she came home late, sliding into bed without a word. Other nights she didn't come home at all. I'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlight leaking through the blinds, listening for the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. The silence became its own kind of torture. By December my mental health was in shambles. I was supposed to be preparing for the holidays, but instead I was barely functioning. My work performance slipped. I missed deadlines, zoned out during calls, and once even forgot to mute myself, while muttering curses under my breath. My manager noticed, of course, and scheduled a check-in. I lied, told him I was just stressed with everything going on in the world, which technically wasn't a lie. The world was falling apart, but it wasn't the pandemic eating me alive. It was Emily. At night, I'd sit on the couch scrolling through old photos on my phone. Trips to Myrtle Beach, pumpkin patch dates, her graduation day. I'd zoom in on her smile, her eyes, trying to reconcile the woman in those pictures with the stranger now sharing my bed, but not my heart. I wondered if she had ever really been mine, or if I'd just been a placeholder, until someone like Mark came along. That thought haunted me. The idea that I'd invested a decade of my life into something that had always been temporary in her eyes. Christmas was brutal. She spent it with friends from work, which I knew was code for him. I drove to Cleveland again, sat in my parents' living room with the tree twinkling in the corner, trying to fake My mom kept glancing at me with that worried look mothers get, like she could see right through my plastered-on smile. Eventually she cornered me in the kitchen, pressing a mug of mulled cider into my hands, and asked if everything was okay. I broke down. Right there, in the kitchen of my childhood home, with the smell of cinnamon and cloves in the air, I told her everything. The texts, the lies, the fact that Emily had promised me forever, but was already living another life with someone else. My mom hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry without holding back. My dad didn't say much when he found out. He just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't deserve that." Simple words, but they hit hard. When I drove back to Dublin after Christmas, the townhouse felt colder than ever. Emily wasn't there, of course. She texted me late that night, saying she was staying at a friend's. I didn't even reply. The truth was, I didn't want her to come back anymore, but the idea of her leaving still gutted me. It was like I was addicted to the very thing destroying me. By January 2021, the facade cracked completely. One night she sat me down in the living room, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes avoiding mine, and said she was moving out. She framed it as needing time to figure herself out. But I knew the truth. She wasn't leaving for herself. She was leaving for him. She packed her things over the course of a weekend, watching her fold clothes we'd bought together, wrap mugs we'd shared coffee in, and carry out boxes of memories was excruciating. Every slam of the door as she hauled another box to her car felt like a nail in the coffin of our relationship. When she finally left for good, I stood in the empty living room surrounded by echoes of our life together. The blue-painted spare bedroom was still there, still waiting for a future that would never come. The couch where we'd binge-watched Stranger Things sat like a relic of a different era. Even the air felt different, hollow somehow. The first few weeks alone were hell. I couldn't sleep in our bed, so I crashed on the couch, waking up stiff and groggy. I stopped cooking, surviving on frozen pizza and takeout. The townhouse, once filled with her laughter and the smell of her perfume, became a mausoleum of silence. My friends tried to pull me out of it. Ryan came over one Saturday with a case of beer and a determination to get me back in the game, but I wasn't ready. He talked about setting up a dating app profile, joked about how the pandemic made Zoom dates the new normal, but the idea of talking to another woman felt impossible. My heart was still shackled to Emily, even as she lay in another man's. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the humiliation, knowing that everyone at her hospital probably knew she was with Mark, knowing my friends had probably suspected before I did. I felt like a fool, like I'd been the last to get the memo that my relationship was over long before she packed her bags. I spiraled. I'll admit that. There were nights I drank too much, scrolling through her social media, until my vision blurred. I'd analyze every photo, every caption, wondering if Mark was just outside the frame. I even considered messaging him once, typing out a furious paragraph, demanding to know what gave him the right to steal my life, but I deleted it. In the end, I knew the blame rested on her shoulder. She was the one who'd made the choice. By spring 2021, I hit rock bottom. One evening, I found myself sitting in that pale blue spare room, the one we'd painted for a child that never came. The walls seemed to close in on me, suffocate. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and thought about how my life had derailed. 10 years wasted, 10 years building a future that crumbled in the span of a few texts. But rock bottom has a strange way of offering clarity. That night, as I stared at the empty walls, I realized something important. Emily had already destroyed me. If I stayed down, I was letting her win twice. I couldn't change what she had done, but I could control what I did next. I started small, therapy. My company offered free virtual sessions, and I forced myself to book one. The first call was awkward. I sat in front of my laptop, fumbling to find words while a woman named Dr. Bennett patiently waited. Eventually I spilled everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the nights I couldn't sleep. Saying it out loud to someone who didn't judge me was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Then came exercise. I dusted off the old treadmill in the garage, started running. At first I barely made it 10 minutes without wheezing, but slowly the miles added. The physical pain was a distraction from the emotional one, and for the first time in months, I felt something resembling progress. By summer I was not okay but better. I could go days without thinking about Emily, though nights were still hard. I'd lie awake sometimes, imagining her life with him, wondering if she was happy, wondering if she thought about me at all. The questions never really stopped, but the sharpness dulled. In August 2021, I finally saw her again. I hadn't planned on it. I ran into her at Kroger of all places. She was in the produce aisle, laughing at something Mark said as they picked through avocados. My stomach twisted, my chest tight, but I forced myself to keep walking. She glanced up, our eyes meeting for just a second. There was something in her expression I couldn't place. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort, but she didn't say a word. Neither did I. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer in hand, staring out at the quiet street, and realized the worst was finally behind me. She had promised me forever, but chosen him instead. That choice had broken me, shattered me into pieces I didn't recognize, but I was still here, still breathing, still fighting to put myself back together. The fallout of her betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it also forced me to confront who I was without her. And though I wasn't there yet, I could feel the faint stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. By the time fall of 2021 rolled around, I was tired of being the guy everyone pitied. Friends meant well when they invited me out for beers or when they sent late-night texts asking if I was holding up okay, but I could see it in their eyes whenever we met. They looked at me like I was fragile, like I was permanently broken. And maybe I was for a while. But I knew I couldn't live the rest of my life defined by what Emily had done to me. The thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't just end. It lingers, like smoke after a fire. But eventually you get sick of choking on it. I wanted air again. That's when I started shifting from survival mode to something else. Something closer to control. I didn't want revenge in the Hollywood sense. No dramatic confrontations or elaborate schemes. What I wanted was to take my life back. To stop letting Emily and Mark dictate the story. They had stolen enough from me already. It began with small but deliberate choices. I changed the locks on the townhouse. Not because she was trying to come back, but because I needed the symbolic act of claiming the space as mine. I cleared out the spare bedroom, painting over the pale blue walls with a warm gray. I donated the crib mobile we'd bought on a whim years earlier. The one that had collected dust in the closet. The process was brutal, but it was also cleansing, like I was exorcising ghosts. In September, I sold the townhouse. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every corner whispered her name. I used the money to put a down payment on a small condo in downtown Columbus. Nothing fancy, but it overlooked the Scioto Mile. I liked the idea of waking up and seeing the river, the city moving around me. It made me feel less alone. Moving also gave me the excuse to cut ties with the last physical remnants of Emily. I boxed up old photos, gifts, keepsakes, and tossed them in the dumpster. It hurt. Sure, there's something unnatural about throwing away pieces of your past, but I realized clinging to them was like picking at a wound that would never heal. Around the same time, I reconnected with myself. I started reading again, something I hadn't done much since college. I dove into novels, biographies, even self-help books. Anything to fill the quiet. I picked up running more seriously too, signing up for a half marathon in spring. Having a goal that was mine, not ours, gave me purpose. But healing isn't linear. There were setbacks. Moments that reminded me of how fragile progress can be. Like in December 2021, when I got an invite to Ryan's engagement party. Walking into that room, seeing couples holding hands, people toasting to love, felt like ripping open stitch. I smiled, congratulated Ryan, even danced a little. But when I got home I collapsed onto my bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking, that should have been me and Emily by now. Still, each setback was followed by a rebound. Therapy helped. Bennett kept pushing me to confront my anger instead of burying it. She told me that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, but learning how to carry the pain without letting it define me. Then came the moment I didn't expect, seeing Emily again in early. It was February, almost 5 years since that Valentine's Day dinner that first felt wrong. And I was at a Starbucks near the hospital. Laptop open, nursing a coffee. She walked in with Mark. They looked ordinary, not glowing with new love. Not like the perfect couple I'd tortured myself imagining. Just two tired people ordering lattes. I felt the initial punch in my gut, the old bitterness rising. But then something strange happened. I didn't feel crushed. I didn't feel like my world was collapsing again. I just felt detached, almost pitying. She caught my eye, froze for a moment, then gave me this small awkward smile. Mark glanced at me, clearly unsure who I was, and she quickly steered him away. That was the turning point. I realized she wasn't some goddess I had lost, nor was she the villain I'd painted her as in my darkest moments. She was just human, flawed, maybe even unhappy. And me? I was still standing, stronger than I thought I'd ever be. That realization shifted something in me. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. For the first time since it all began, she wasn't at the center of my story anymore. By spring 2022, I crossed the finish line of that half marathon in Cleveland, lungs burning, legs aching, tears streaming down my face, not because of the race itself, but because I'd proven to myself that I could finish something, push through pain, and come out the other side. When I got the medal, I thought about how Emily had once promised me forever, and how forever had turned out to be a lie. But the truth was, I didn't need her promise anymore. I had my own. And yet life has a funny way of circling back. In summer 2022, I got a message from Emily, out of the blue. She asked if we could talk. My first instinct was to delete it, to protect myself from reopening old wounds. But curiosity got the better of me. We met at a quiet bar downtown. She looked older, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Her smile didn't reach her eye. She ordered a glass of wine, fiddled with the stem nervously, and finally confessed that things with Mark weren't what she thought they'd be. She admitted she missed me. She said she regretted leaving. Hearing those words should have been vindicating, the kind of moment I'd once fantasized about. But instead it just made me sad, because I realized she wasn't apologizing because she loved me. She was apologizing because she had lost what she thought would replace me. I didn't lash out. I didn't rub it in her face. I just listened, nodded and finally said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." And I meant it. That was the moment I truly turned the tables. Not by hurting her, not by seeking revenge, but by walking away with my dignity intact. After that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was as if I had finally set down a heavy load I didn't even realize I was still carrying. She cried that night quietly into her glass of wine, and I knew the tables had turned. She was the one haunted now, not. By the end of 2022, my life looked completely different than it had 2 years earlier. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I traveled, something I hadn't done much when Emily and I were together. I went to New York City with Ryan, took photos in Times Square, walked across the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. I visited London in December, standing on Tower Bridge with the Thames glittering below, feeling small but alive. I even started dating again, slowly, cautiously, but genuine. It wasn't about replacing Emily. It was about opening myself up to the possibility of love without fear. Some dates were awkward, some ended in nothing, but each one was proof that I was capable of moving forward. By early 2023, I realized I had turned my life into something Emily could never touch again. She had promised me forever but chosen him instead, and now, she was the one crying over the life she threw away. I didn't need to seek revenge. Life had already delivered it in its own quiet, merciless way. The tables had turned, and this time I was the one walking away with peace. By the time 2023 rolled into full swing, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the last few years with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. If someone had told me back in 2018, when Emily first confessed about Mark, that one day I'd be at peace, stronger than ever, and even happy again, I would have laughed bitterly. Back then, happiness felt like a language I no longer spoke. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when you stop clinging to the past and start opening yourself to the present. Letting go for good. The last time I saw Emily was in late spring of 2020. She had reached out again, asking if we could meet just as friends. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to avoid reopening old scars, but another part of me felt I needed closure, not for her sake, but for mine. We met at a quiet park near where we used to walk our dog years ago. She looked different, not just older, but worn, like someone carrying too much regret. Her smile was forced, and her eyes carried the kind of sadness I used to know intimately. We talked for a while, about surface-level things at first, work, mutual friends, the weather. But eventually she asked me the question I think she'd been holding onto for years. "Do you hate me?" It caught me off guard. Hate? I thought about all the nights I'd cried, the hollow mornings waking up alone, the humiliation of watching her walk away with Mark. And then I thought about the life I'd built since the condo downtown, the races I'd run, the trips I'd taken, the people I'd met. "No," I said honestly. "I don't hate you, I just don't love you anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded, looking down at her. That moment, for me, was the final release. The chains that had bound me to her, chains of anger, grief, longing, shattered. I realized I didn't need anything from her anymore. Not her love, not her apology, not even her friendship. We said goodbye, and this time it was truly goodbye. Building a new life. From that point on, the story stopped being about Emily at all. It was about me, about who I was becoming. I kept running, eventually completing my first full marathon in Chicago that fall. Crossing that finish line was more than just a physical accomplishment. It was proof that I could endure, that I could take pain and transform it into strength. Work too started to feel different. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I pursued new projects, volunteered for leadership roles, even mentored younger colleagues. For years I'd felt like I was living in the shadow of betrayal, but now I felt capable of standing tall, of casting my own light. I also started writing. What began as journaling for therapy turned into essays, reflections, even blog posts. To my surprise, people resonated with my words. Strangers reached out, saying my story made them feel less alone in their own heart. For the first time, my pain wasn't just mine. It was something I could use to help others heal. Love after loss. And then there was Sarah, We met in the most ordinary way possible through a mutual friend's game night. She wasn't flashy, not someone who instantly lit up a room the way Emily once had, but she was warm, grounded, and real. She laughed with her whole face, listened with genuine attention, and had a way of making even mundane conversations feel meaningful. I was hesitant I built walls around myself so high I wasn't sure anyone could climb them. But Sarah didn't try to climb, she just sat at the bottom, patient, kind, waiting for me to open the gate when I was ready. And slowly, I did. With her, love felt different. It wasn't built on adrenaline or grand gestures. It was built on trust, on showing up for each other in small ways every day. She didn't have to promise me forever. Her presence in the present was enough. Full circle, by the start of 2024, Emily was nothing more than a chapter in a book I no longer needed to reread. She had promised me forever once, but forever is just a word when the actions don't match. Sarah never made that promise, yet her consistency showed me what real love looks. Looking back, I realized that losing Emily had been both the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. Worst, because it shattered me. Best, because it forced me to rebuild into someone stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I no longer saw myself as a victim. I was a survivor, yes, but more than that, I was a man who had faced the darkest parts of life, and come out not just alive, but thriving. When I crossed the finish line of another marathon in spring 2024, Sarah waiting at the end with open arms, I finally understood something Dr. Bennett had told me years earlier. Closure isn't about getting answers from the person who hurt you. It's about giving yourself permission to move on. That day, sweaty and exhausted but smiling, I knew I had done just. Resolution. Emily may have promised me forever, but forever was never hers to give. What she left me with instead was a hard-earned lesson. Love is not about promises, it's about action. And my resolution, the thing that carried me into the future, was simple. I would never again let someone else define my worth. I would never again confuse possession for love. I would never again lose myself trying to hold on to someone else. My story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about resilience, growth, and finding peace after chaos. It was about turning tables without lifting a finger, because sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. And that's exactly what I intended to do.